Hello everyone, my name is Uthris, and welcome back to Planet Coaster. Today, I'm being a little quiet. It's 1 in the morning, and I should be asleep right now. And my girlfriend's asleep in the other room, but let's not tell her I'm doing this now. So, today we are working on the Undead Town Hall from Warcraft 3. It turns out to be a little bit harder than I thought it would be. It is somewhat a floating ziggurat for those of you who don't know or maybe haven't played much of Warcraft here recently or what have you, but it is a fun, interesting build. For those of you who aren't comfortable with spires, this is basically one giant spire. So this is just going to be one long tutorial of talking about how to build a spire brought to you by Uthris and Company. We are going to be essentially working on one side. There will be times where we copy and paste and rotate in the other sections just so that we can see kind of where we are at with the shaping of things. However, this is how most spires are kind of created in Planet Coaster. You start with the general sloping. You'll start with one side, copy it over, and rotate it depending on how many sides you want the thing to have. It's pretty straightforward to do, and hopefully you guys can learn a thing or two about doing something like this, especially when you're using a lot of slightly angled wall pieces and little custom things like this. There's really hardly any grid items in this. It's all just hand placed angles upon angles off of each other. Now, I will say, and I will go ahead and preface this episode, that I am torn about this build. I think it turned out okay in terms of maybe its silhouette being relatively accurate. The coloration, though, let me tell you, it does not end up being very good. I'm probably going to go back in and recolor it before I make it a public item on the workshop, and you guys will have to follow me on Twitter to know when that kind of gets released over the next day or so. But in the meantime, at least the structure is done, and I can call it a good jumping point and release an episode on another build in Planet Coaster, and hopefully you guys are gonna like it nonetheless. But in essence, we are using a lot of the new kind of haunted DLC pieces. Again, I don't get to use DLC pieces in Alpine Odyssey. For me, this is kind of a good way to test a lot of these things out and just kind of expand my base skill set when it comes to the game. It's important to do things like this from time to time for sure, and because otherwise you aren't really going to get better at the game. You are just going to be building a lot of the same. And I think doing these builds, and they're almost like studies for an artist. I do have an art degree, and these things are almost like going out and maybe drawing a tree. It's how you kind of learn building shapes, learn new techniques, and practice them in something that's kind of already designed, and then you can kind of take elements from it and use in your own buildings. So over here is the top of the ziggurat. I kind of probably made this too large. Really, the proportions aren't quite accurate when it comes to this build compared to the others. I was trying to keep the footprint about the same as the first two Warcraft builds. However, the screenshots that I have and the fact that this is an isometric kind of camera perspective in Warcraft 3 makes this top part closer to the camera and a bit larger looking than probably it would be at a complete side view. So I think that kind of messed with the proportions a little bit. You also know that in at least the pictures that I saw, a lot of times the kind of detailing on this is a lot of kind of gold or dull gold in areas, and I don't think that looks good in Planet Coaster. As of right now, it just looks like a giant orange beacon, and this is what I'm saying with the coloration. The coloration to me just doesn't scream the Undead faction like the human faction did and the orc faction did in the other builds. So to me, this is where this structure kind of fails in the long term, and I'm perfectly happy with showing you guys elements that maybe I'm not 100% satisfied with, simply because I think it's a good learning experience for both of us. I can upload, get feedback, and maybe change things. I probably won't make a second episode on the build, but I can definitely change things, tweet out the new result, and upload it to the workshop for you guys. But that's enough about, I guess, the rough guidelines of the build. I think it's time to start talking about what we're actually doing here. So the build is kind of detailed in the sense that it has kind of these scrollings going across its surface. So that's what we're doing with one of the kind of flat pillar toppings here, and just poking it barely through so we can kind of motif out the top of these flat bits. These flat bits in kind of plateauy areas in the Ziggurat is usually where your player color is shown. So if you're a blue character, these upper flat spots would be blue. If you're red, they would be red. All of our other builds so far have been using the red player, so eventually I'll swap out these marble floors. I'm just kind of using them as a grid. I didn't really put them down with that in mind, but when I was doing this motif work and getting this all lined up, I figured out that it actually helped a lot. And so that might be something to consider going forward if you're doing kind of a detailed area or motif that you want on a flat surface. Maybe put this marble over it and use it as a grid to reference the left and the right side. Since there's no real mirror mode when it comes to Planet Coaster, I kind of wish there was at this point. It would definitely speed up the process a lot. Here, testing out some of the other bricks, because frankly the cobblestone down below is fine. I just wish I could recolor it. It's textured and it's pretty close to the reference image, if not a little too small of a stone compared to the Warcraft 3 model. But you know, I figured it looked close enough, though we end up changing that in the long run. You guys will see how that kind of gets reworked a bit later. Here is the red roof. We're going to be using back of windows just for a little bit of texture, and that thing is just going to pop the runic carving on it a little bit more, such as that. And even these should be colored. Again, this whole thing just ends up being too orange, too vibrant, too lively, you know, for such an undead structure. So that is just a constant critique I have of this thing. It just kind of burns your eyes out with its saturation. I really should have dulled it down taking a look at it here. But here is just more motif work. It does get a little bit more complicated, and it should have some finer strokes going through here. However, you know, with the bulkiness of a lot of these pieces that we're working with, I'm kind of just trying for the base shapes, try and get a lot of the just the idea of what was going on here down. We have our trial and error here with windows and other items to try and replace the cobblestone. Now that the angle is established, it's kind of easier to go ahead and try and replace that. I was thinking about like hand tiling it, hand cobbling things together to make the fact. And what I end up settling on is testing some of these like webbing, because I thought that would have been cool, but they reflect too much light. But what I mainly end up settling on is using some of these ruin pieces. In my mind, the Ziggurat's probably a haphazardly built construction, you know, using ruins in large chunks of material, and then the framework and runes around it are just kind of magically bonding it together. So that's what we decided to do, and using the ruined kind of flatter side on here with the occasional large rock chunk sticking out is a decent look, I will say. It could be maybe a little bit better, maybe a little less busy as it becomes a little blurred together everywhere. We get our one side almost completely done, checking on it, making sure it makes sense, throwing it up into the air. It is supposed to be a floating structure after all, so gotta make sure it makes sense while that high. We get the upper layer being added to the stonework and the rubble kind of just creeping out in spots, which does add a little bit of a flair to it, which is pretty nice. The cool thing about the upper structure, though, is that it's see-through. I do like that aspect a lot. You can see through, and we end up kind of building something inside of it as well in the long term. We have the Understructure. Now, this is a floating item, and like I said, I believe, I'm not 100% sure, I didn't look too much into it, but this rune work and kind of framework of the building kind of holds it all together, right? So it's all these amalgamation of like ruins and magic binding it. So I figured that there would be roots and rocks at the bottom kind of exposed as the thing was kind of torn from the ground. So that's why we have that detail. On the corners, I'm trying to get some sort of spine, bone-like structure going along here. We're going to run into the same problem that we did with the Orcus structure. It's going to look more, I guess, spiky than necessarily bone material. And it's a darker bone, almost like a dragon bone spines going up and down it, which do look really cool. But in our kind of simplified kind of rendition here, you know, the silhouette is pretty accurate, but the detailing of it is probably a little weak for my taste. But it just goes down. We have a bigger spike kind of at the bottom corner there, and then it just kind of fades away as this kind of ceiling structure to hinge and bind the four corners of the building together. And at this point, the base structure is kind of done. You know, there's a bit of the underwork to do, but that's a lot of copying, pasting, and kind of reworking little areas. We do build the interior kind of decoration here. I did see some art pieces kind of rendering the top spire almost like a big obelisk with runes carved into it. Now with the Warcraft 3 screenshots, the framework of the structure is see-through, and there is a glow inside of there. So to me, I think having this obelisk, standard stone obelisk in here is a good way to kind of tie those two things together between the art and maybe how it's implemented in the game. And you know, I think it looks nice. It's interesting to have an eggshell kind of spire, right? This exterior framework and then this interior thing being revealed, and it creates some cool shadows as well on the ground. And now copying down a lot of the base kind of roots of the structure. The slope was a little too gentle, so we kind of sharpened that up a little bit just to keep the profile a little bit shorter. At this point, we'll kind of copy all four sides again, delete out some of the overlapping corners, because this is how you kind of rough in angles, and then you kind of clean it up with a little bit of manual labor. And the annoying thing about doing some complicated spires like this is simply you have to build a section, copy and rotate it over, make sure it all lines up. Delete that section that you just copied over, and then continue work on the spire if you want it to be, you know, kind of spot checked as you go through. And that's something that I do a lot. It does kind of slow down the process though when you do that. At this point, I think we are just going to slap a door on the front of it here. Going to go with one of the graveyard archways because haven't used that piece ever before, and we're going to framework this out with some walls to the left and the right of it, and give it some extra buttresses and stoneworks on the front side because it's there in the reference image, and it makes some sense. It gives one side at least some extra detail that the other sides might not have. And of course, you know, when you do upgrade your structure in Warcraft 3, the whole thing changes. It's also going to be the first time we ever use the large skull item in a long time on this structure here. But anyways, that's enough of me rambling. We're going to go ahead and hop into real time, and you guys can give me your awesome feedback. Okay, we're going to be doing a little bit of real-time building here at the end of this episode. I decided Nat to short you guys a good build. So, I am in the process right now of stitching and recoloring the whole facade with the new color that is a little bit darker, a little bit more muted in tone, so you can see these side by side. This one on the right looks like an oil rig. This one on the left looks a little bit more streamlined. I did also thin down the upper spire a little bit so it doesn't look quite as bulky, and I think that improved it as well. Overall, the muted colors I think lends itself more to the effect that we're going for. The fact that this thing is a undead structure, potentially, you know, net full of nice things, so it's working out for us, I think, decently well. By the way, this is the front door. Those of you who did not watch the speed build, it is pretty standard undead kind of entrance. You know, the classic skull, exposed skull kind of motif going on here. And this is the pirate skull rock formation that really we haven't used since probably the very first beta. I haven't found a use for this thing since. And now I'm running into selection issues as I want to try and hurry this up so you guys can just simply look at the finished structure here. So do those, there we go, perfect. In real-time building is something we do on the streams, guys, so don't expect too many of these type of episodes during the build series. I'm just trying to do this to fix a growing issue that was bugging me here on this, and that should line up basically perfectly just like that. So that is new Ziggurat, old Ziggurat. Let's get rid of the old one because frankly it's not as good. Alright, so there we go. This is the Undead Ziggurat. That is the tier 1 town hall for that faction in Warcraft 3. It is decently in scale, I think, with the rest of them. I might keep that variation over there. Now, it is a bit taller, but in terms of just above view footprint, some of these base town hall buildings are missing some of the surrounding walls and things. So it might look bigger, but that's simply because these are technically unfinished. This one's more finished in regards to its actual size. It does look spooky, especially when you kind of get it above ground there, and it is quite an imposing structure for sure. You know, you could add some lights to this, you could add some smoke effects and other things just to make it look a little bit more natural in its habitat, but overall it's a decent build. I hope you guys enjoyed this episode, full of its flaws as ever. If you guys want, you can download this off the Steam Workshop. If you guys are enjoying the awesome build series or anything else I do on this channel, feel free to leave a like, leave a comment as well on what you guys think of the new color versus, say, the old color and the new kind of slimmed down tower. And I'll see you guys in the next episode.